Hello. Welcome back to Dark Files Now, the channel where real mysteries, unsolved crimes, and the darkest chapters of history come to life. If you're fascinated by true stories that continue to puzzle investigators decades later, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to delve into one of the saddest and most mysterious crimes ever committed, a case that has intrigued the world for almost 40 years. So sit back, dim the lights, and join me as we examine the facts, the evidence, and the unanswered questions behind this fascinating true story. This is the case of little JonBenét Ramsey. The night the world stood still. Throughout the American city, Christmas 1996 was a time of peace, family, and celebration. In Boulder, Colorado, a college town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, families slept with full bellies and presents under the trees. It snowed gently outside. It was the kind of night that seems immune to any tragedy. On 15th Ponderosa Street, one of the most imposing houses in the neighborhood belonged to the Ramseys. JonBenét Ramsey, a successful tech entrepreneur, his wife Patsy, and their 2 children. They were a seemingly perfect family, prosperous, photogenic, enviable. That night, they had just returned from a Christmas party with friends. In the early morning hours between 10 p.m. on December 25 and 6 a.m. on December 26, 1996, something happened in that house. Something that would never be fully explained. And when the morning of December 26 arrived, the lives of the Ramseys and little JonBenét had changed forever. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, Patsy Ramsey went downstairs and found a ransom note on the bottom step. 3 handwritten pages. The note said that her daughter had been kidnapped by a foreign group and that $218,000, coincidentally almost the same amount as John Ramsey's annual bonus, would be demanded for JonBenét's return. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was 6 years old. She was a children's beauty pageant competitor, famous in Boulder for her smile and her outgoing personality. She had won the title of Miss Colorado for children weeks before. Her name, a combination of her father's and mother's names, was as unique as the child who bore it. And she was missing. The discovered, the crime in her own home. Patsy Ramsey immediately called the emergency number. The recording of the call, which would become one of the most analyzed in American criminal history, revealed a mother in collapse, alternating between crying and broken words. Boulder police were dispatched at 5:55 a.m. 6 officers arrived at the house within minutes. What happened in the hours following the police's arrival would be criticized decades later as one of the biggest crime scene preservation failures in American history. Friends and acquaintances of the Ramseys were invited into the house. People circulated through the rooms. Evidence was touched. The crime scene was, in the words of later investigators, completely contaminated before forensic work could begin. For hours, police searched for signs of JonBenét in and around the house. The basement was briefly inspected, and a locked room was ignored. In the afternoon, homicide investigator Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey and a friend to sweep the house. At 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey went down to the basement, opened the door to the wine room, and found his daughter. JonBenét was covered by a white blanket, with her wrists tied above her head and duct tape over her mouth. She had been strangled. The subsequent forensic report would determine that the cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation with a skull fracture. The medical examiner estimated that she had died between 8 and 12 hours before being found, that is, in the early hours of Christmas Day. The news spread with the speed that only 1996 allowed, still without social media, but with ubiquitous television journalism. TV cameras were already surrounding the Ramsey home when JonBenét's body was removed. The images swept across the country, and an immediate question began circulating in newsrooms and dinner table conversations. Who would do this to a 6-year-old child? The police in Boulder, a university town with a very low rate of violent crime, had never investigated a crime of such complexity. The department was small, inexperienced in homicides, and ill-equipped for the pressure that was to come. And in the first few hours, unknowingly, it had already made mistakes that would compromise the investigation for decades. The autopsy report would reveal details that the police never fully disclosed to the public, details that would fuel theories and controversies for decades. Among them, evidence of sexual abuse, the skull fracture that may have been caused by a blow before strangulation, and traces of food residue in the stomach, suggesting that JonBenét woke up that Christmas night. The Ramseys, the family in the eye of the storm. JonBenét Ramsey was 53 years old in 1996. He was CEO of Access Graphics, a Boulder-based technology company that had grossed over $1 billion the previous year. Patsy Ann Ramsey, his second wife, was 40 years old and had been Miss West Virginia in 1977. The couple had 2 children, Burke, 9, and JonBenét, 6. On the outside, the perfect family. Children's beauty pageants were Patsy's world, and she had immersed JonBenét in that universe since she was 4 years old. The child competed frequently, practiced presentations, and was photographed with elaborate makeup and costumes. At the time, this world remained largely invisible to the American public. The Ramsey case would bring it to magazine covers and generate a national debate about the exploitation of children. In the days following the crime, the Ramseys became the center of an unprecedented media storm. The Boulder police, who rarely faced cases of this magnitude, communicated early on that the parents were suspects. Not formally indicted, but suspects. And the media, voraciously, treated this suspicion as near certainty. In January 1997, the Ramseys gave an interview to CNN, the first and only one at the time. Sitting side by side, John serene and Patsy visibly devastated, both denied any involvement and asked the police to look for a killer who remained at large. The interview was analyzed by body language experts, graphologists, and psychologists for years. Every pause, every hesitation became evidence for some theory. The ransom note became the epicenter of the investigation. It was long, 3 pages and 365 words, which was unusual for extortion. Forensic experts compared the handwriting with samples of Patsy Ramsey's writing and found similar characteristics. Other experts disagreed. No expert was able to conclude with certainty whether Patsy had written the note or whether she definitely had not written it. JonBenét was buried on December 31, 1996, the last day of the year she was born, or rather, the last day of the only full year of her short life. The funeral was in Marietta, Georgia, Patsy's hometown. Hundreds of people attended, and while the Ramseys were saying goodbye to their daughter, investigators were already reviewing the funeral footage, looking for any suspicious behavior. What few knew was that Patsy Ramsey had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 1993 and had fought the disease with aggressive treatment. In 1996, she was in remission, but lived with the shadow of relapse. She was a woman who had survived cancer, seen death up close, and who now faced the loss of her daughter and the public suspicion that made her, for many, a murderer. The A investigation: mistakes, suspects, and pressure. The Boulder police investigation started badly and never fully recovered. The decision not to immediately isolate the house, to allow friends to enter and circulate, not to treat the parents as suspects in the first hours, all of this created forensic gaps that no future analysis could fill. Detective Steve Thomas, who would become the most fervent investigator among the Ramseys, would admit years later that the case had been irretrievably compromised on the first day. The timeline of the night of the crime has generated permanent controversy. The Ramseys claim to have arrived home around 10 p.m., put the children to bed, and gone to sleep. The medical examiner estimated that JonBenét had died between midnight and 6 a.m. This meant that the crime, whatever its nature, had occurred sometime during those quiet hours, inside a house where everyone should have been sleeping. A crucial element of the investigation was the basement window. John Ramsey claimed to have broken the glass months earlier to get in when he had forgotten the key. The window latch was loose. There were soil marks on the frame. Police investigators analyzed and concluded that the marks were old, not recent. Other experts disagreed. The window became one of the most enduring points of debate in the case. Did an intruder enter through it or not? DNA would become the most important and most frustrating piece of evidence in the case. Samples of unknown DNA were found in JonBenét's underwear, DNA that did not match any member of the Ramsey family. In 2008, new analysis with more advanced technology confirmed the presence of unknown male DNA on the girl's clothing, in sufficient quantity to suggest direct contact, not contamination. In 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey sent a formal letter to the Ramseys, now widowed, as Patsy had died of cancer in 2006, declaring that the family was officially out of the circle of suspects. The letter acknowledged that the unknown DNA belonged to an unidentified man who had been in contact with JonBenét. It was the closest thing to an acquittal a family could receive without a formal trial. The FBI was consulted over the years and developed a profile of the potential killer, the man, probably with prior access to the house, with some level of familiarity with the family read or with the neighborhood, able to remain calm enough to write a long and elaborate ransom note, which suggested premeditation or at least presence of mind under extreme pressure. The profile was disturbing because it described someone who could be anyone. The focus on possible outside intrusion led investigators to revisit who might have had access to the Ramsey home. The family had thrown a party at their residence days before Christmas. Dozens of people had circulated there. Maintenance workers knew the layout. Friends knew about John's annual bonus, those $218,000 mentioned in the note. But identifying who had motivation, opportunity, and ability remained impossible without conclusive physical evidence. The suspects, the list that never ended. Over the years, more than 40 suspects were formally investigated and hundreds were analyzed informally. The list included former employees of John Ramsey's company, family acquaintances, JonBenét's teachers, beauty pageant instructors, neighborhood neighbors, and even a waiter from a pizzeria who had delivered food on the night of the crime. None were indicted. No physical evidence connected any specific person to the crime. Gary Oliva was a registered pedophile who lived in Boulder in 1996 and was arrested in 2000 with photographs of JonBenét in his possession. Arrested for possession of child pornography, he wrote letters from jail suggesting he knew more about the case. Investigators examined him as a suspect, but no physical evidence directly connected him to the crime, and his DNA, when tested, did not match the material found on JonBenét's clothing. In August 2006, the world was shaken by an unlikely confession. John Mark Carr, an American detained in Thailand, claimed to have accidentally killed JonBenét. Patsy Ramsey had died of cancer 2 months earlier, unaware that a man had confessed. Carr was brought to the United States under extensive media coverage, but his DNA did not match that of the crime scene. His alibi was confirmed. He had lied for reasons that psychologists still debate. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, was 9 years old on the night of the crime. He was interviewed by investigators specializing in child testimony and stated that he had slept through the entire night and had heard nothing. In 2016, after years of silence, Burke gave an interview to the Dr. Phil show and was immediately the target of intense speculation based on body language. He sued a television channel and won a multi-million-dollar settlement for unfounded accusations. In 2023, the media reported that investigators were using forensic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer, to trace the unknown DNA found at the scene. This approach compares DNA from the scene with ancestry databases to identify relatives of the suspect and, by elimination, arrive at the individual. The results of this analysis have never been publicly released. The investigation remains officially open. Forensic genealogy has changed the landscape of the case. If the unknown DNA found on JonBenét's clothing belongs to the killer, it is possible that his identity is only a few degrees away from a profile in some public ancestry database. Experts estimate that, with adequate database coverage, virtually any American can be identified in this way. The answer may be closer than ever. The case remains officially open at the Boulder District Attorney's Office. Some believe the answer lies in the files the prosecutor has not yet released. Some believe the answer lies in the DNA waiting to be matched to the right profile. And some believe that, with the main suspects dead or aged, the truth will never be formally proven, only whispered. The media and public judgment. The JonBenét Ramsey case was the first major criminal case of the 24-hour cable news era. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, newly launched in 1996, needed constant content. The case provided a photogenic family, a beautiful pageant child, wealthy parents, a seemingly idyllic college town, and an unsolved crime. It was the kind of story that never ended because there was never an answer. Programs like the television tabloid Hard Copy and A Current Affair covered the case daily, often with unverified information. Hired experts analyzed the Ramseys' body language. Neighbors were interviewed. The ransom note was read aloud live. JonBenét, or rather, images of JonBenét in pageant attire, has become the face of a national narrative about the loss of innocence, obsession with the perfect childhood, and the limits of public mourning. The case reignited the debate about children's beauty pageants with an intensity the market had never experienced. Images of JonBenét in heavy makeup and miniature adult costumes were repeatedly shown on television. The public was divided. Some saw exploitation, and others saw artistic expression and a celebration of childhood. The debate was never resolved, but the images of JonBenét made it urgent and unavoidable. Patsy Ramsey lived the remaining 10 years of her life under public suspicion. Although she was never indicted for any crime, she was judged and condemned by a significant portion of public opinion. She continued to be recognized in restaurants and shops. She received threatening and insulting letters. And she carried the grief for her daughter alongside the weight of being called a murderer by strangers who had never reviewed a single page of the dossier. Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer on June 24, 2006, without ever seeing the case resolved, and without ever being formally exonerated in her lifetime. 2 months later, John Mark Carr would falsely confess to the crime, and DNA would prove his innocence. In 2008, the letter of acquisition would arrive 2 years too late for the woman who needed it most. Decades later, the JonBenét Ramsey case remains one of the most productive in the true crime industry. Documentaries, podcasts, dramatized series, and investigative specials are produced regularly, each promising new angles, new evidence, or new theories. Interest has not been lost. If anything, the proliferation of streaming platforms has given the case a second, third, and fourth life among new generations who weren't alive in December 1996. The answer is wit rat. 3 major theories dominate the debate about the JonBenét Ramsey case after almost 30 years. Each has serious defenders, each has evidence to support it, and each has evidence to contradict it. The fact that all 3 coexist without any being definitively refuted is the most accurate measure of the depth of uncertainty the case has generated. The first theory is that of the intruder. Someone entered the Ramsey house that Christmas night, through the basement window, through an unlocked door, or in some other unidentified way. This someone wrote or brought the ransom note, kidnapped or killed JonBenét, and left unseen. This theory is supported by the unknown DNA and the FBI's criminological profile. But it raises questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. The second theory, favored by some Boulder police investigators and Detective Steve Thomas in his 2000 book, points to Patsy Ramsey. According to this theory, a domestic accident, JonBenét waking up and wetting the bed, Patsy losing control, would have resulted in the child's death, followed by a staged kidnapping. This theory explains the long and elaborate note, but it doesn't explain the unknown DNA. The third theory involves Burke Ramsey. Proposed by some investigators and adopted by a controversial CBS special in 2016, it suggests that Burke, then 9 years old, may have accidentally assaulted his sister with a blunt instrument after a dispute over food, and that the parents, in a panic, covered up the accident. Burke sued and won substantial damages for this claim. The theory lacks direct physical evidence. In 2008, the Boulder prosecutor's office formally excluded John and Patsy Ramsey and Burke from the list of suspects based on DNA. But this exoneration did not solve the crime, it only confirmed that the killer was someone else. And that other person, identified only by a partial genetic profile in a database that may or may not contain them, remains nameless, faceless, and without consequences. Forensic genealogy, which identified the Golden State Killer in 2018 after decades of impunity, represents the greatest current hope for resolution. If the DNA found on JonBenét's clothing belongs to the killer, and if any of her relatives have already taken an ancestry test at companies like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, it is possible to reconstruct a family tree that leads to her identity. Boulder investigators have confirmed that this approach is being used, but have not released results. And so the case remains, suspended between what is known and what is not proven. There is someone's DNA. There is a dead child. There is a family destroyed by unjust suspicion. There is a city that has never felt completely safe since then. And there is a question that no official letter, no documentary, and no forensic analysis has been able to answer: what really happened that Christmas night in that house on 15th Ponderosa Street? JonBenét and what remains. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey would be 34 years old in 2024. She would exist somewhere, perhaps in Boulder, perhaps in another city, perhaps with children of her own. She would be an adult woman with a life, a career, childhood memories. Instead, she exists eternally at 6 years old, with a tiara and makeup, in the photographs the world knows. The real child, the one who woke up early, who was afraid of the dark, who fought with her brother, disappeared twice, once at Christmas 1996, and again under the weight of the mythology that replaced her memory. John Ramsey rebuilt his life. He moved to another city. He remarried. He continued to defend his daughter's memory and fight what he considered a negligent investigation. In recent decades, he has become one of the most vocal critics of the failings of the American criminal justice system, not as an activist, but as a father who never got answers about his daughter's death. No suspect has ever been indicted for the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. There is no conviction. There is no verifiable confession. There is no official answer for the family, for Boulder, for the American public that has followed the case for nearly 3 decades. There are only files, DNA waiting for comparison, conflicting theories, and a 6-year-old child who deserved more than to become the epicenter of a cultural obsession. Every December, when snow blankets Boulder and Christmas lights return to the windows, the JonBenét Ramsey case returns to the headlines. A new documentary, a new analysis, a new theory. The murder of December 26, 1996, remains as present and as unsolved as the day it happened. And somewhere possibly still alive, possibly dead, possibly in some city watching the news about himself, is the only human being who knows what really happened that night. JonBenét Ramsey, 6 years old, Boulder, Colorado. December 26, 1996. The case remains open. The child remains without justice. And the question remains, as it always has remained, as perhaps it always will, unanswered. This is the Dark Files Now channel. Thank you so much for staying with us until now. See you in the next video.